Get lost, Dad. I don't need your help. Bella's words hit me like a slap across the face. I stood in her office doorway, holding the business proposal I'd spent weeks preparing. Her mother-in-law, Veronica, sat behind Bella's desk with a smug smile spreading across her perfectly painted lips. The woman had been poisoned from the day my daughter married her son. Bella, I just thought, I started, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. The same hand I'd taught to tie shoelaces, to write her name, to shake hands with respect. Now it dismissed me like I was nothing. You thought wrong, she said, not even looking up from her laptop. This is my business now. I don't need advice from someone who never built anything bigger than a corner store. The corner store that put her through college. The corner store that paid for her wedding. But I didn't say that. I couldn't. Veronica's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she watched my daughter tear me down. This was her victory, not Bella's. I folded the proposal carefully and slipped it back into my jacket. 28 years of being her father, and this was how it ended. With 3 words that would change everything between us forever. Did you see his face? Veronica's laughter echoed through the office as I walked away. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but the walls were thin. Poor old man thought he could play with the big kids. I stopped in the hallway, my hand frozen on the elevator button. Through the glass door, I could see other employees pretending not to notice the spectacle. My own daughter sat silent while this woman mocked me in front of everyone. He's a washed-up failure, Bella, Veronica continued. Look at you now. Young, successful, building an empire. Why would you need help from someone who spent 30 years selling newspapers and candy bars? The elevator doors opened, but I couldn't move. I waited, hoping Bella would say something. Anything. Defend the man who raised her alone after her mother died. Who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Who never missed a school play or soccer game. But she said nothing. Just nodded along like a puppet while her mother-in-law pulled the strings. The elevator doors closed without me. I took the stairs instead, each step heavier than the last. The security guard nodded as I passed. At least someone still showed me respect. Outside, the city buzzed with life while mine fell apart. That night, I sat in my small apartment staring at old photos. Bella at 5, gap-toothed and grinning on my shoulders at the zoo. Bella at graduation, tears in her eyes as she thanked me in her speech. Bella on her wedding day, dancing with me while Smith's family watched from their expensive table. When had I become the embarrassment? When had loving her become a weakness? I remembered the nights I stayed up helping with her homework while working double shifts. The birthday parties I threw with dollar store decorations because it was all I could afford. The college fund I built quarter by quarter, saving every penny I could. She used to call me her hero. Now I was just someone to get lost. But as I sat there in the dark, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, burning in my chest like acid. But underneath it, something harder was forming. A resolve I hadn't felt in years. I wouldn't beg for her love anymore. I wouldn't grovel for respect I'd already earned. But I wouldn't disappear either. She thought she knew who I was. She was about to learn how wrong she could be. I opened my laptop and started researching. If she wanted to play in the big leagues, she'd better be ready for what was coming. 3 days later, I was having coffee at Donald's diner when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. Smith sat 2 booths away with his business partner, speaking in hushed tones about Bella's company. My mother's got her completely under control, Smith was saying. Bella thinks every idea is hers, but Mom's been pulling the strings since day one. It's perfect. His partner leaned forward. What about her father? I heard he tried to get involved. Smith laughed. That old fool? Mom handled him in 5 minutes. Bella told him to get lost right in front of everyone. You should have seen his face. My coffee went cold as I listened. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a calculated campaign to isolate my daughter from everyone who truly cared about her. Veronica wasn't helping Bella succeed. She was making sure Bella needed her. The best part, Smith continued, is Bella actually believes she's in charge. Mom's got her convinced that cutting off her dad was her idea. Meanwhile, every major decision goes through our family first. I left money on the table and walked out before I did something stupid. But now I understood. This wasn't about me being a failure. This was about control. And my daughter was the prize they'd already won. Or so they thought. The family dinner happened 2 weeks later. Bella insisted I come, probably feeling guilty about what happened at her office. I almost said no, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see their game up close. Veronica held court at the head of the table while Smith carved the roast like he owned the place. Bella sat beside her mother-in-law, hanging on every word as the older woman described her strategic vision for the company. Of course, the expansion into the West Coast was my idea, Veronica was saying. Bella's got the passion, but she needs guidance from someone with real business experience. I cleared my throat. Actually, Bella pitched that expansion idea to me 6 months ago. She'd been researching it for Dad. Bella's voice was ice cold. Nobody asked you. The table went silent. Veronica smiled like a cat with cream. Smith didn't even look up from his plate. And my daughter, the little girl who used to ask my opinion on everything, had just shut me down in front of everyone. I was just saying. Don't. Bella's eyes were hard. Just eat your dinner and let the adults talk. The adults. I was 52 years old, but apparently I wasn't adult enough for my own daughter's table. Veronica's victory was complete. She'd erased me from my own family's story, and Bella had helped her do it. The call came from Donald 2 days after that disaster of a dinner. We'd been friends since high school, and he still had connections in the business world from his banking days. You might want to hear this, he said, his voice careful. Word is your daughter's company is in trouble. They're looking for investors. Big time. I sat up straighter. What kind of trouble? Cash flow problems. Overextended on that West Coast expansion. They need at least $500,000 to stay afloat, maybe more. Donald paused. Thought you should know, given what you told me about the family situation. After I hung up, I stared out my window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my daughter was discovering that passion without planning led to problems. The expansion Veronica had claimed credit for was drowning them in debt. I could call Bella. Offer to help. But I already knew how that would go. Another humiliation, another dismissal, another chance for Veronica to watch me crawl. Or I could do something else. Something they'd never see coming. I opened my laptop and started making calls to old contacts. If Bella's company needed investors, maybe it was time they met one. They just wouldn't know who he really was. For the next week, I became a student again. I researched Bella's company from every angle, studying their financial reports, customer reviews, and market position. What I found was both heartbreaking and infuriating. The business model was solid. Bella's original vision for boutique marketing services had real potential. But Veronica's improvements were killing it slowly. Overpriced office space in the trendy district. Unnecessary staff hires from Smith's family connections. Marketing campaigns that looked impressive but delivered weak results. My daughter had built something beautiful, and they were painting it with fool's gold. The financial records told the real story. 6 months ago, before Veronica took over the strategic planning, the company was profitable. Growing slowly but surely. Now they were hemorrhaging money on flashy projects that brought prestige but not profit. Bella had always been smart with money. I'd taught her to balance a checkbook when she was 12. But Veronica had convinced her that thinking big meant spending big, and my daughter had trusted the wrong person. The worst part was seeing how much Bella was working. 16-hour days trying to make her mother-in-law's terrible ideas succeed. She was killing herself for someone else's vision of success. Well, that was about to change. I was leaving Donald's diner the next evening when I heard Smith's voice from the parking lot. He was on his phone, walking to his expensive car while talking loud enough for half the block to hear. "The old man is completely finished," he was saying. "Mom destroyed him at dinner the other night. Bella won't even take his calls anymore." I ducked behind a parked truck and listened. You should have seen him at her office. Came in with some pathetic business proposal like he was doing us a favor. Bella told him to get lost right in front of everyone. It was beautiful. The person on the other end must have asked about me, because Smith laughed. What's he going to do? Open another corner store? The guy's a joke. Spent his whole life playing small time, and now he's crying because his daughter outgrew him. Mom says he'll probably just fade away now that Bella's cut him off. He got in his car and drove off, leaving me standing in the parking lot with my hands clenched into fists. Not from anger this time, but from determination. They thought they'd won. Thought they'd erased me completely. But they'd forgotten something important. I might have been small time, but I'd been small time for 30 years. I knew how to save money, how to spot value, and how to be patient. Very patient. Andy Lancaster found me the next day. I was surprised when the young man approached me outside the coffee shop near Bella's office building. He looked nervous, check ing over his shoulder like he was being followed. "You're Bella's father, right?" he asked quietly. "I'm Andy. I work in her accounting department." I nodded, wondering what this was about. "Look, I know this might sound weird, but I wanted you to know that not everyone thinks you're the problem." His voice was barely above a whisper. "That woman, Mrs. Chambers, she's been making everyone's life miserable. Bella's different when she's not around." Andy glanced toward the office building. "Your daughter's a good person. But that mother-in-law of hers has her convinced that being ruthless is the same as being successful. She's turning Bella into someone she's not." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I've seen your daughter crying in her office after Mrs. Chambers leaves. Because good people are quitting because they can't stand the toxic atmosphere. And because someone needs to know that not everyone believes their version of the story." He handed me a business card with just his personal number on it. "If you ever want to know what's really happening in that company, call me. Someone needs to be looking out for Bella, even if she doesn't realize she needs it." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd like our conversation had never happened. Setting up the investment front took 2 weeks of careful planning. I used my life savings, the small inheritance from my father, and a loan against my apartment to create Fest Investment Partners. The name came from my father's middle name, close enough to my heart to remember, distant enough to avoid suspicion. I hired a young lawyer, Don Nunez, to handle the legal paperwork. Bright kid, fresh out of law school, hungry enough to ask few questions when I paid his fee in cash. We set up a small office in a business center downtown and registered the company properly. "So you're looking to invest in small to medium businesses?" Don asked as he prepared the incorporation documents. "Specifically companies with potential that need guidance," I said. "I've been watching the market for a while. There are a lot of good ideas out there being run by people who don't understand business fundamentals." Don nodded. "And you want to stay anonymous initially?" "I prefer to evaluate opportunities without the distraction of personal relationships," I said. Let the numbers speak for themselves. It wasn't entirely a lie. When Fest Investment Partners was ready, I had Don reach out to several companies, including Bella's. We presented ourselves as a private investment firm interested in marketing services companies with growth potential. The game was about to begin. Watching Bella struggle from a distance was the hardest part. I started parking across from her office building during lunch hours, just to catch glimpses of my daughter. She looked exhausted. The confident young woman who'd told me to get lost was showing cracks. I saw her through the office windows, pacing while talking on her phone. Rubbing her temples during meetings. Working late while the rest of the building went dark. Veronica's strategic guidance was driving her into the ground. The worst was Thursday afternoon when I saw Bella come out of the building and sit on the front steps. She put her head in her hands and just sat there for 10 minutes. My instinct was to go to her, to ask what was wrong, to be her father. But I knew how that would end. Another rejection. Another public humiliation while Veronica watched from the sidelines. Instead, I called Andy from the coffee shop across the street. "How is she really doing?" I asked. "Not good," he said quietly. "The expansion is failing. We're behind on payroll. Mrs. Chambers keeps pushing for bigger spending while the bank account gets smaller. Bella's trying to hold everything together, but she's drowning." "What about Smith?" Andy snorted. "He shows up twice a week and takes credit for anything that goes right. When things go wrong, it's always someone else's fault." I watched my daughter finally stand up and go back inside. Soon, Fest Investment Partners would make contact. Soon, she'd have a lifeline she didn't know she needed. I had to test her one more time. Call it weakness, call it hope, but I needed to know if there was any part of my daughter left under Veronica's influence. So I went to her office one more time. "I heard you might need some help with the business," I said when she finally agreed to see me. "I know you think I don't understand, but nothing." Bella didn't even look up from her computer. "I told you before. I don't need failures in my corner. This is a grown-up business, and I need grown-up help." The words hit harder the second time because now I knew how desperate she really was. She was drowning but too proud to take the life preserver I was offering. Or maybe too poisoned by Veronica's influence to recognize help when she saw it. "Bella, I know you think. I think you should leave before I call security." Her voice was flat, empty. "I mean it, Dad. Stop embarrassing yourself. Stop embarrassing me." I stood there for a moment, looking at this stranger who used to be my little girl. The daughter who once told everyone that her daddy was the smartest man in the world now thought I was too stupid to help with her failing business. "Okay," I said quietly. "I won't bother you anymore." As I walked out, I heard her sigh with relief. That sigh made my decision final. Fest Investment Partners would be making contact very soon. Don made the initial approach on a Tuesday morning. I watched from across the street as he entered Bella's building, carrying a leather briefcase and looking every inch the professional investor. We'd rehearsed his presentation, but he didn't know the real reason behind this particular investment. An hour later, he called me with the update. "They're desperate," he said. The daughter tried to play it cool, but the mother-in-law was practically begging. "They need capital immediately or they'll lose everything within 60 days. "What did you offer them?" "Exactly what you said. Immediate injection of $500,000 in exchange for 49% equity, with options to increase our stake based on performance milestones. They want to think it over." "They'll take it," I said. "They don't have a choice." That afternoon, I received a call on the Fest Investment Partners phone line. Bella's voice was carefully controlled, professional. "We'd like to move forward with your proposal," she said. "When can we meet to finalize the details?" "Tomorrow," I said, disguising my voice just enough. "My associates will handle the paperwork. I prefer to stay in the background until the relationship is established." "Of course. We appreciate your confidence in our company." "Our company." Soon she'd learn exactly whose confidence she'd earned. The signing happened on Friday. I watched from a coffee shop across the street as Veronica strutted into the building like she owned it. She'd been telling everyone that her business connections had attracted this mysterious investor, taking credit for saving the company while having no idea who was really behind it. Don called me an hour later with the news. It's done. Fest Investment Partners now owns 49% of Bella's company. They seemed very pleased with the deal. I'm sure they were, I said. What was their reaction when you mentioned the performance clauses? The mother-in-law barely read them. She was too excited about the immediate cash injection. But your daughter read everything carefully. She's sharper than the others give her credit for. That was my girl. Veronica might have poisoned her against me, but she hadn't killed Bella's natural intelligence. The performance clauses were key to my long-term plan. If the company hit certain benchmarks, Fest Investment Partners could increase our stake. If they missed targets, we got more control. I'd written the contract carefully, with Don's help, to ensure that responsible management would be rewarded and reckless spending would have consequences. Veronica thought she'd just secured her power base. Instead, she'd handed control to the man she'd worked so hard to destroy. Time to see how they handled success. The first crisis hit 3 weeks later. I'd been monitoring the company's activities through Andy, who kept me informed about the daily chaos. Veronica had celebrated the investment by pushing for an immediate office renovation and hiring 3 new employees they didn't need. Then their biggest client canceled a major contract. I watched from my usual spot across the street as Veronica's car pulled up at 9 in the morning. She stormed into the building like a general heading to war. Through the office windows, I could see the shouting match that followed. Andy called me an hour later. It's chaos in here. The client canceled because they weren't happy with the quality of work. Mrs. Chambers is blaming everyone except herself, but it was her idea to cut corners to save money on that project. How much did they lose? $200,000 in projected revenue over the next 6 months. Plus the reputation damage. Bella's trying to fix it, but Mrs. C. Me very important. I had Don send an official notice that afternoon. Fest Investment Partners was concerned about recent performance indicators, and would be evaluating management decisions more closely. We scheduled a board meeting for the following Monday. Time to make my presence felt. The board meeting was my first official appearance as Fest Investment Partners. I sat at the head of the conference table in a tailored suit, my back to the window so the light would make it harder for them to see my face clearly. Don had done his job well. They had no idea who I really was. The recent client loss is concerning, I said, keeping my voice professional and slightly different from my normal tone. Our investment was based on projections that assumed better risk management. Bella sat across from me, taking notes and looking stressed. Veronica was at her right hand, trying to control the narrative. That client was unreasonable, Veronica said. We delivered exactly what was promised. Some people just can't appreciate innovative marketing approaches. Innovative or unfinished? I asked mildly. Our research suggests the campaign was rushed to market without proper quality control. Veronica's face flushed red. Who exactly are you to question our methods? You've been involved for 3 weeks. I'm the person whose money is keeping this company operational, I replied. And I'm concerned that money is being managed by people who don't understand the difference between confidence and calm-donaldance. The room went silent. Bella looked up from her notes, something flickering in her eyes. For a moment, she looked like my daughter again. The ultimatum came disguised as a business opportunity. Don delivered it the next morning while I listened from another room. Fest Investment Partners is prepared to inject another $250,000, he told them. But there are conditions. Management structure needs to be optimized. Spending must be controlled. Quality standards must be enforced. I could hear Veronica's sharp intake of breath through the speaker. What kind of management changes? Bella asked. Non-productive positions will be eliminated. Decision-making authority will be consolidated with people who demonstrate actual business acumen. And all major expenditures must be pre-approved by the investment team. You can't just come in here and fire people, Veronica snapped. This is our company. Actually, Don said smoothly, the investment agreement gives Fest partners significant input on management decisions when performance targets aren't met. Which they haven't been. I smiled in my separate room. Veronica was about to learn that contracts had consequences. The offer stands for 48 hours, Don continued. Accept the terms and receive the additional funding, or find the money elsewhere. Your choice. Through the speaker, I could hear my daughter's quiet breathing as she considered the choice between independence and survival. They accepted the terms, of course. They had no choice. The changes started immediately. I had Dawn terminate 3 of Veronica's pet projects and 2 of the unnecessary employees she'd hired. The fancy office renovation was cancelled. Resources were redirected to actual client service and quality control. Andy called me that evening with an update. It's like a different company already. The remaining employees are actually excited. They haven't felt this optimistic in months. How is Bella handling it? Better than expected. She's been pushing for some of these changes for weeks, but Mrs. Chambers kept overriding her. Now that there's backing from the investors, Bella's actually able to run her own company again. That was the key insight. My daughter had never lost her business instincts. She'd just been outnumbered by people who confused their personal agendas with professional strategy. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched through reports and occasional glimpses as Bella took control of her company for the first time in months. Client satisfaction improved. Employee morale increased. Even their financial projections started looking realistic again. But Veronica wasn't giving up without a fight. The corruption came to light on a Thursday afternoon. I'd hired a forensic accountant to review the company's books as part of Fest Investment Partners' due diligence process. What he found exceeded even my expectations of Veronica's greed. She'd been siphoning money through fake vendor contracts with companies owned by Smith's relatives. Office supply purchases that never arrived. Marketing services that were never performed. Consulting fees paid to people who didn't exist. The accountant estimated she'd stolen nearly $70,000 over 6 months. I had Dawn call an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. When I walked into that conference room carrying a folder of evidence, I felt like justice itself was sitting at that table. We've discovered some irregularities in the financial records, I said, opening the folder. Irregularities that represent either gross incompetence or deliberate fraud. Bella leaned forward. What kind of irregularities? I slid copies of the evidence across the table. Bank transfers to shell companies. Purchase orders for services never rendered. A systematic pattern of theft disguised as business expenses. Veronica's face went white as she recognized her own signatures on the fraudulent documents. This is impossible, she stammered. There must be some mistake. The mistake, I said quietly, was thinking nobody would notice. Bella's world crumbled that afternoon. Not only had she discovered that her trusted advisor was a thief, but Smith knew about it. The forensic accountant found emails between husband and wife discussing how to hide the fraudulent transactions. I watched from across the street as Smith's car pulled up to the office building. Through the windows, I could see the confrontation that followed. Gestures, pointing fingers, and finally Smith storming out while Bella sat alone at the conference table. Andy called me with the details. She threw them both out. Mrs. Chambers tried to blame everyone else, but the evidence was too clear. Smith showed up to support his mother, and Bella told him to choose between his wife and his criminal family. What did he choose? He left with his mother. Told Bella she'd regret this and that her mystery investor was probably a fraud too. Real supportive husband. So now my daughter sat alone in her office, betrayed by the people she'd trusted most. The same people who'd convinced her to throw away the one person who'd never lied to her. It was almost time for the final revelation. But first, I needed to let her sit with the truth of what she'd chosen over her father's love. The board meeting that would change everything was scheduled for Monday morning. I spent the weekend in my apartment, looking at old photos of Bella and trying to imagine how she'd react when she learned the truth. Would she be angry? Embarrassed? Grateful? I honestly didn't know. The daughter I'd raised would have been apologetic and eager to rebuild our relationship. But the woman she'd become under Veronica's influence remained a mystery to me. Don arrived early to help me set up. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked as we arranged the conference room. "You could maintain the anonymous investor role indefinitely. Keep helping her without the personal drama." "She needs to know," I said. "Not for my sake, but for hers. She needs to understand that the people who really love her don't need to manipulate her or steal from her or make her choose between loyalty and success." At exactly 10 o'clock, Bella walked into the room. She looked tired but determined, like someone who'd spent the weekend facing hard truths about the people she'd trusted. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat across from me. "I want to start by thanking Fest Investment Partners for helping uncover the financial irregularities. Without your oversight, that theft might have continued indefinitely." "You're welcome," I said. Then I reached up and removed my sunglasses. "Hello, Bella." The silence that followed lasted forever and no time at all. Bella stared at me like I was a ghost, her mouth slightly open, her pen frozen halfway to her notepad. "Dad?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Fest Investment Partners is me," I said quietly. "I'm the mysterious investor you've been working with for the past 2 months. The man who saved your company is the same man you told to get lost." Veronica's chair squeaked as she tried to rise, but Dawn was blocking the door. Her face was purple with rage. "This is fraud," she screamed. "He deceived us. He lied about who he was." "I used a legal business entity to make a legitimate investment," I replied, not taking my eyes off Bella. "Everything Fest Investment Partners did was completely above board. Unlike stealing $70,000 from your daughter-in-law's company." Bella finally found her voice. "How? How did you?" "The corner store. The corner store I sold 3 years ago to a national chain for $1.2 million, I said. The corner store that was actually part of a small real estate empire I'd been building since you were in high school. The corner store you were ashamed of was my greatest success." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Everything she thought she knew about her father, everything Veronica had convinced her to believe, crumbled in that moment. Veronica's explosion was spectacular and pathetic. "This is impossible. He's a nobody. A failure. I investigated him myself." "You investigated what I let you see," I said calmly. "A tired old man running a small store. You never looked deeper because you thought you already knew everything worth knowing." I turned back to Bella, who was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "For months, I watched you struggle with decisions that weren't yours, implementing strategies that hurt your business, and isolating yourself from people who cared about you. I watched this woman poison you against your own family while she stole from your company." "But why?" Bella's voice was shaking. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have listened. Because you'd already decided I was a failure who had nothing to offer. Because the only way to help you was to become someone you might respect." Veronica made one last desperate attempt at control. "Bella, don't listen to him. He's manipulating you just like I said he would. This whole investment thing is just another way to control your life." "Is it?" I asked, sliding a document across the table. "This is a contract transferring my shares back to you for $1. No strings attached. No control provisions. No payment requirements. If I was trying to manipulate you, would I be giving you your company back?" Bella picked up the contract with trembling hands, reading it twice before she looked up at me. For the first time in months, I saw my daughter in her eyes instead of Veronica's puppet. "You're giving it all back." "It was always yours," I said. "I just helped you realize what you were capable of when you stopped listening to people who didn't want you to succeed." The tears started then, quietly at first, then building into sobs that shook her entire body. 28 years of being her father, and I'd never seen her cry like this. Not from pain, but from understanding. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I said terrible things. I treated you like you were nothing. I chose them over you." "You chose what you thought was best for your business," I said gently. "You were wrong, but you were trying to succeed. I understand that. But I threw you away. I threw away the person who loved me most for people who were stealing from me." I stood up and walked around the table to where she sat. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I put my hand on her shoulder, the way I used to when she was small and upset about something at school. "You didn't throw me away," I said. "I was always right here. I'll always be right here." 6 months later, Bella's company was thriving. She'd won back the client Veronica had lost and gained 3 more through word-of-mouth referrals. The team respected her leadership, and she'd learned to trust her own business instincts again. Veronica was facing embezzlement charges and had been banned from any involvement in the company. Smith had filed for divorce, claiming he'd been manipulated by his mother. Bella didn't fight it. She said she finally understood the difference between a partner and a parasite. We met for lunch every Tuesday now, father and daughter, talking about business and life and the future she was building. She'd learned to ask for advice without feeling weak, and I'd learned to give it without expecting gratitude. "I still can't believe you pulled that off," she said over coffee last week. "Creating a whole investment company just to help me." "I created an investment company to save your business," I corrected. "I did it because you're my daughter and I love you, but also because you deserved better than what you were getting." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I love you too, Dad. And I promise I'll never tell anyone to get lost ever again. Even when they deserve it." She laughed, and for a moment she was 5 years old again, gap-toothed and grinning on my shoulders at the zoo. "Well," she said, "maybe sometimes. But never you. Never again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's saving the people they tried to take from you."